Okay, so what I'm going to do is just start going through these problems and I'll show you how I would work through them. And then I just want to kind of see I can knock out these first 7 problems here without changing my screen too much. So, as a review, just remember you have to know your conversions. So at this point, I'm assuming you know your conversions as I do, and I'm just going to go through. If I'm doing this the way I would do it, I would just move my decimal point over 3 spaces and I would get an answer of 1,750. If you're answering that big of a number on the on Blackboard, you probably don't need the comma in there. But if you do include the comma and it gets marked wrong, I'm sure it'll get corrected. So just don't worry about that. The problem will be is if you put a 0.0 in your answer and that's not supposed to be there, that's where you're going to run into issues. So what I'm going to do is if this is something that you struggle with still, just remember you can always set up a conversion because you already know how to go from grams to milligrams because you know 1 gram is 1,000 milligrams. And that'll help to remind you if you're supposed to multiply or if you're supposed to divide. Okay. Like here, I'm going from milliliters to liters. So I'm actually going to move my decimal 3 to the left. And so I'm going to get 0.25. Whenever I go from pounds to kilograms, I'm going to take 128 pounds. I'm just going to show you the dimensional analysis of this because I usually just shorthand and just say divide by 2.2. But the reason you're doing that is because the conversion from pounds to kilograms is 1 pound is equal to 2.2 kilograms. So 128 divided by 2.2. And we get 58.18. This was the question that Pearl had asked earlier. If I have an answer like this, what do I do with that? I want to look at the hundredths place, and then if it's 5 or greater, we round up. If it's 4 or fewer, then don't round it, leave it at, but drop the numbers that are past the tenths place. So my answer for this would be 58.2. Going from milliliters to ounces, again, it's helpful to see the conversion. You may not know what this is off the top of your head, but you do know that 1 ounce is equal to 30 milliliters. So 90 divided by 30 is 3 ounces. Micrograms to milligrams. This is going to be a similar thing. And the reason this is here is to show you that you can have very small numbers and that you don't round your decimal answers. Like you wouldn't round this 0.25 anyways, because if you have a number less than 1, you're going to round it to the nearest hundredth. But when you have a number like what we're going to show you here in just a little bit, we're actually going to move this 1, 2, 3 spaces. So your answer here is actually 0.025. What you don't want to do is you do not want to round that to 0.03. That would be wrong. You don't want to round your basic metric to metric conversions. All right. We've worked through this a couple different times. As I've mentioned before, a lot of times if you see this label, just pay attention to the order and pay attention if they're asking you for teaspoons or tablespoons. So 250 milligrams dilantin by mouth. How many teaspoons will you give? And all I'm going to do is take my 250 milligrams over my available of 125 milligrams, and then my quantity. So instead of writing the 5 milliliters as my quantity, because I know 5 milliliters equals 1 teaspoon, so I'm just going to say times 1 teaspoon. And then I get 2 teaspoons. And then then you would just write 2. On this one here, so you can't see all of the label, but we can see that it's 250 milligram capsules. Again, the thing that might change is this. You want to make sure you know what this means. BID means twice per day. And that is important because you could see this asks how many capsules to give per day. If it says per dose, then you give the per dose amount. And if it doesn't say anything, you give the per dose amount. But if it says per day, you need to make sure you're paying attention to how many times you're giving this dose. So again, doing order over available, 250 milligrams times 1 capsule. And that gives me 2 caps per dose. And if I'm giving 2 doses, that equals 4 caps per day. Does that make sense? I hope so. So I'm just going to leave that up here for a second, and then I'm going to clear my writing and scroll down to the next set of questions. All right. All righty. Now to the next set of questions. I think I can get that number 10 in here too. Let's see. And not quite. Oh, there we go. Perfect. Okay. So let's work through 8, 9, and 10. All right. So this next question says potassium chloride elixir. So our order is the 40 milliequivalents. QID tells you 4 times a day. It says we have available 20 per 15 ml. And it wants to know how many milliliters to give per dose. And then to circle the correct amount on the cup. On Blackboard, you'll just drop a point on your answer. One of the things that I'll tell you is that your answer will be on the cup. So if you see a question like that and you don't get one of these answers, then that's your clue that you did something wrong. Okay. But you're just going to do order of available. I think most everyone is comfortable with that. You take your 40 milliequivalent order divided by the 20 milliequivalent. And here's where most students will get these types of questions wrong, is they'll put, for the quantity, they'll put 1, but the quantity here is 15. So make sure you pay attention to what the quantity is. And then we're going to get 30 ml. So if I'm circling the correct amount, I might answer it by doing that, putting my 30 in here. Sometimes they want you to shade it in, but I would just say circle it. If you're, because it's a Blackboard test, just drop the point on the 30 or at the line on the 30, and you'll be fine. All right, these 2 questions are TubeX questions. TubeX questions mean that you need to mark the TubeX. So don't forget to put a, it says to circle, so don't forget to circle the amount on the TubeX for these questions, okay? Here's the other thing. If it's a TubeX question, that means your answers will be on the TubeX, okay? Because you can't guess. You have to give the specific amount. So we can see here that the order is 3,000. SC means subcutaneous, which means it's an injectable. And then we can see that what's available is 10,000 units per milliliter. So just using order over available, I'm going to take 3,000 over 10,000 times my 1 ml. These are both units, equals 0.3 ml. And then so if you just are supposed to drop your pointer, then you just want to drop your pointer on the TubeX where it's supposed to go. Before I do anything, I always like to verify what these marks indicate, because sometimes you can have a syringe where everything is every 2 ml or every 2 units. So I just want to make sure that these are in 1/10 of an ml. So this is 0.5 ml at the half. This is 0.6, 0.7, 0.8, 0.9, and then this is 1. So that helps me out. So if you're ever like wondering, like, is this 0 or 1? Just start at the 5 and work your way backwards. So if this is 0.5, this is 0.4, then this would be 0.3. So this is what you would circle. Same thing for this. We look at our order. I do have to move this because I can't see the available. I think the available is 50. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to solve it for 50, and then I'll come back to it if it's wrong. But 35 milligrams per 50 milligrams times the 1 ml. And I'm going to get 0.7, I think. Let me just double check that. I'm guessing. 0.35 divided by 50. Sorry, not 0.35. 35 divided by 50. Yeah, 0.7.
How did you get 50?
Go ahead. I couldn't hear you.
How did you get 50?
It's just not, it's not pictured. It's what it's on the label. I'll show you once I scroll down. And then again, I want to verify the numbers here. So if this is 0.5, 0.6, 0.7, 0.8, 0.9, 1, so 0.5, 0.6, 0.7, this is the part I would circle. So the 50 milligrams per ml is down here. I just when I scroll down, I'm gonna clear out my writing. And then I said I would correct it if it ends up being wrong, but that's where that label information is coming from. I remember that it's 50 milligrams per milliliter. All right, so let's clear this and work down to the next set. Okay, so you can see that the label is 50 milligrams per milliliter. So that's where that 50 came from. Let's just go ahead and do number 11 here. So it says the physician orders 7.5 milligrams for Mr. Smith's anxiety, and then you have 5 milligram tablets available. How many tablets are you going to give? So you can write this as a fraction, but I'm just going to write my order as the decimal just because it's easier to plug into your calculator if you do it that way. So I'm going to take 7.5 milligrams divided by the 5 milligrams. So my order of available times my quantity of 1 tablet. And what I'm going to get is 1.5 tablets. So on your test for Blackboard, this is the number you would use is 1.5 because it'll tell you don't do a fraction. But if you're on a paper test, they may want you to write it as 1.5 tablets. You want to ask your instructor when you get to the point where you're doing a paper test. You're not doing a paper test. You're doing it on Blackboard, so you shouldn't have to worry about that nuance. Just make sure you read the directions if it tells you to just give the decimal answer. And then remember, you can give somebody a half tablet because we assume, at least for the test, that tablets are scored and can be cut in half. You cannot make that same assumption for capsules. In fact, you wouldn't give somebody a half capsule anyways because you wouldn't be giving them an exactly half anyways. Okay. All right, let's look at the next couple here. Okay, I'm just gonna do these here. All right, so the order is V-Silin K suspension 500 milligrams by mouth QID, which means 4 times per day. And it says how much would you give per dose? So again, the point of knowing the 4 times per day is there's a chance that they'll throw out a question that will say how many milliliters will they be given in the day. So if it doesn't say that, then you know that they're looking for the dose. If they tell you dose, but if they want the day, they will specify per day. So on this particular label, we have 125 milligrams per 5 ml. You also see that it says 200,000 units. That's only really important is it if the order was also in units, but since it's not, you just ignore the 200,000 units. It's just this, it's an equivalent. So 200,000 units of V cell and K is equivalent in this particular dose or in this particular available medication is the same thing as 125 milligrams. So I'm going to take my order over my available times my quantity. And again, this was what will get missed is you put the wrong quantity here. So pay attention to that, what you're supposed to be using, what the per is. Not everything is per 1 ml. Okay. Again, I'm only saying that because when I remediate students, that's typically probably the most common thing other than the student didn't remember how to do the conversions properly or there were rounding errors. But aside from that, reading the label is going to be important. So that's why I keep harping on that. Anyways, and then what we're going to get is 20 ml. Again, you don't have to write in the label, just make sure your labels, but if there's a blank there and it's a paper test, write it. Fluid replacement volume question. Okay, if you recall, I told you the way to kind of interpret these questions are to look at the actual output, put it over the expected output, and multiply by the replacement volume. Alternatively, you could just kind of set up like a ratio where you just you're comparing the left side to the right side, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So it says for every 120 milliliters of urine output, you're going to replace with 30 milliliters of water via PEG tube every 3 hours. If urine output for the last 3 hours is 200 milliliters, the fluid replacement volume would be what? So the way that I do this is I look at the actual output. So it's at 200 milliliters, right? So that's what the patient actually voided out. I'm going to put that over I call it the expected output, right? Because this is what's associated for every 120 milliliters out, we're going to replace with 30. And the reason this gets all confusing is because this is not necessarily order or available. I know that from experience that this is how this will work out. But if you don't like what I'm doing here, alternatively, what I would suggest doing is taking your replacement volume over your your expected volume, the 120 ml, set it equal where you're looking for the new volume and then the 200 ml. Now you could cross multiply and you can do that sort of thing if you want to. But what I usually do is I just pay attention to the two numbers that we know, the 200 and the 120. So if I take 200 and divide by 120, I actually get 1.6 repeating. So it's like a weird number. Okay. But knowing that, I at least have an idea of how much to kind of multiply by. So what I would do for a question like this, like let's say you're doing it this way, I would just leave this number in your calculator and then just multiply that number by the replacement volume, which is 30. And what you're going to get is 50.000000001. So your answer is 50. Okay, with all those zeros there. Alternatively, if you set it up like this, then this would just be 50 ml so that you wouldn't have to worry about any kind of decimal answers. So the kind of the trick to learn here when you're doing your calculations, don't round until the end of all your calculations. So don't round mid calculation. The exception to that will happen next semester when you convert pounds to kilograms, but for right now, just focus on whatever's in your calculator, leave it in there. If you do this particular method. If you're using this method, it will work out where you won't have to worry about like the 1.6 repeating. But I don't know what ways you're doing this. I just wanted to show you both ways just so you have two strategies to kind of get to the same answer. So I'm just going to say the 1.666. All right, and then the sliding scale, remember, is just can you read what it says? If it gives you a glucose reading, here it says 212. Can you find that range? And then what would you do? You'd give 2 units. All right. Let's see what's next. All right. So another question using where we're going to follow the same kind of tenets of solving these things. We have an order of 1.5 million units of an oral swish and swallow 4 times per day. And again, we want to know how much to give per dose. And so we look at our order, or our available, I'm sorry, and we see that we have 100,000 units per ml available. So I'm going to take my 1,500,000. So, and 1, 2, 3, that's units over 100,000 units times my 1 ml. And then what I'm going to get is, so there's a couple ways. If you just plug this into your calculator, another shortcut, if you feel comfortable doing this, is however many zeros there are, like you can basically cross them out. So here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we can actually cross out the zeros, and then my answer would just be 15 ml. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, don't feel obligated to. Just make sure when you plug it into your calculator that you're putting in the 1,500,000 divided by the 100,000, and you'll still get the 15 ml. Like I said, I'm just giving you that as a heads up. And sometimes it's nice to just cancel things out and then verify it in your calculator. Okay, I can't do this. Okay, it's all right. So this question, we have the order is amoxicillin 0.25 grams every 6 hours. So if you think about this, Q6H, or every 6 hours, how many 6-hour intervals are there in a day? 24 divided by 6 gives you 4. So this is actually the same thing as QID, 4 times a day. Okay. But that's only really important is if they ask you per day, but here you can see they're asking per dose. And then we can see our available is 125 milligrams per 5 ml. So we have a discrepancy between grams and milligrams. So we want to make sure that we reconcile that discrepancy. And we just do so by converting grams to milligrams. So 0.25 grams, all I'm going to do is move my decimal point over 3, which gives me 250 milligrams. So that's my order, 250 milligrams over my available 125 milligrams times my 5 ml. And then again, if they tell you to circle or indicate the correct amount on the cup, that means your answer is going to be on the cup. Okay. So 250 divided by 125 is 2 times 5 is 10 ml. So then I'm marking my cup at the 10 ml. Or if you're on Blackboard, you just drop your pointer right in the center and you'll be good to go. All right. So this question is hard to answer because it's missing, and I don't think you'll see this question. You'll see 18, but you probably won't see 17. But the reason I am certain you won't see is because there's really two different answers depending on how you answer this. So let me just walk you through it since I have it here and I'm showing it to you. Um, oh, I'm sorry. It tells you specifically which vial to use. So never mind. We're okay. If it didn't tell you which vial to use, then you wouldn't know necessarily what to do. Okay. But you need to know how to read this label when you see all this data here. We have an order of 1,750 milligrams IM intramuscular every 6 hours. And we want to know how many milliliters are we going to administer. Okay. Not every 6 hours. We just want to know how many we're going to administer in one dose. So what I'm going to look at is the table information for the 3-gram vial. The 3-gram vial says we have a volume of diluent to be added of 6.4 milliliters, and it says we have a withdrawal volume of 8 milliliters. This is the same thing as the total volume. Why am I telling you that? Because the volume diluent added is just telling you what how much water you're adding to the powder, and that's important. But when we're actually trying to figure out what the concentration is, you want to know the total and you want to know the vial size. So the way this would be read is the available is 3 grams for every 8 milliliters. Or I can rewrite that as 3,000 milligrams per 8 ml. So when I'm solving for this and I'm using this 1,750 milligrams, I can take my order, 1,750, divided by my 3,000 times my 8 ml. And then I'm going to take 1,750 times 8 divided by 3,000. I'm going to get 4.6 repeating. So I'm going to round my answer to 4.7 ml. Like I said, I don't expect you to see this question on your test now or into the future, just because there are better, um, um, there's better questions that are asked. Like the one below it is a little bit better. But now you're seeing it, and now you know how to answer. So, and you would do the same thing if we were doing the 4 ml vial, or I'm sorry, the 1.5 gram vial, then I would just use the 1.5 gram information. I put 1.5 grams over 4 ml, convert grams to milligrams. Alternatively, you could have converted this milligrams to grams. It's completely up to you. They just need to be in the same units when you're solving it. All right. For this Pfizer pen question, we have our order. You're used to seeing that every 6 hours. And it tells you to choose the strongest concentration. And then how many ml will you administer for the patient? So how do we determine the strongest concentration? I can look at the milliliters diluent added, and I can say, if I add more water, it'll be more dilute, which means it'll be a weaker concentration. So I can say if I add 18.2 versus 8.2 versus 3.2, the 3.2 should be my strongest concentration. But in reality, this doesn't matter. What I want to know is right here, my units per ml. That's the concentration. That's what you're looking for. So when it says to choose the strongest concentration, you want to choose the one that has the bigger number. So 250,000 units per ml is less concentrated than 500,000 units per ml, which is less concentrated than 1,000,000 units per ml. So this is actually our strongest concentration right here. And that correlates with the least amount of water added, but I'm already given the units per ml, so I just need to know what that is. Now, the reason I'm pointing this out is because in the previous question that was discussed, we said, or I said that you take the total volume and the total strength, but that was because it didn't give you the units per ml or the milligrams per ml in that particular question. In this question, however, it does give you units per milliliter. So all you're going to do is compare your orders, the 375,000 units over the 1,000,000 units, and then per ml, so it's just times 1 ml, and then you're going to get an answer of, I believe this is 0.375. Let me just double check. 375, 1, 2, 3, divided by 1, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Yes. So I'm going to get an answer here of 0.375. Now, I have to do something with this answer because I don't need all these decimals, even though it's solid. What I want to do is I want to look at the thousands place. If it's 5 or greater, then I'm going to round up. And so my answer becomes 0.38 ml. Now, I will say this. On your test, I doubt you're going to get an answer where you have to round in this kind of arena because it can get confusing, especially since it's a definitive 0.375 ml. The main reason that I created this question was just to get you to kind of think about it so that way you don't get complacent knowing or thinking that you don't have to round in this particular thing, following the rules associated with your test. You would round this answer to the nearest hundredth place, which would be that 0.38. All right, we already worked through one of these questions. So again, let's say we're comparing the output and the input. So if I have 40 is my replacement volume, and then that's for every 115 milliliters that leaves. And then I have my actual output is 325, and I'm looking for this. I could just say, okay, well, what do I need to get from 115 to 325? So I would say 325 divided by 115. And then I get this crazy number, right? The 2.826. And then there's some other numbers here. So what I would say is keep this in your calculator and then multiply by the 40 ml. So that number. So leave that number as it is in your calculator. You don't even need to write it down. So once you have that 2.82608696565 or whatever happens to be, multiply that number by 40. And what you're going to see is you're going to get an answer of 113.04. Now, if I'm following my rounding rules and rounding to the nearest tenth, 4, we just drop it. And so I'm just going to get an answer of 113 ml. Again, I created some of these questions with the intention of making it more challenging. And so you had to guess or that you would second guess what your answers are, because most likely it'll work out where it'll be like if it's 115 ml, it'll just be whatever 3 times that number is, and then 3 times 40, and your answer will be like 120 ml. It'll be pretty straightforward, but I wanted to challenge you a little bit, which is why I created some of these questions with these answers. That's one reason. The other reason is I don't necessarily know what the answers are going to be when I'm just throwing out some numbers. And so it all comes out in the end, but I'll show you, like, I wanted to show you like what you would do with decimal answers and things like that if you come across that. Okay. Again, don't leave it as 113.0 because you don't need that leading or that that lagging zero. You don't need it. All right. So for this question, and you'll see this next semester, it says your patients should receive 36 units of regular insulin and 28 units of NPH, U100 NPH. So I always like to kind of write some information. So the solution and amount to be drawn up first is going to be 36 units of regular first. Okay, so you want to make sure you have your 36 units of regular first. It then says select syringe A or B and mark the syringe with an arrow to indicate the correct total medication level. So again, this is on your test, it'll just ask you which syringe would you use. You use the syringe that's marked in units. So when you're dealing with insulin, it stays in units. We don't convert insulin to milliliters. Even if you have a label that allows you to do that, we don't convert it. So you would choose this, and then this one just says to choose one of those syringes and then mark the total. So all you're going to do is add 36 plus 28. So you get 64. Now, this is what I was trying to illustrate when we talked about Tubex. The Tubex ones, and I told you like what are the increments, and they were 0.1. So the increments were tenth of a milliliter. These, so I want 64. So let's see, are these in increments of 1? So 61, 62, 63, 64, 65. No, it says 70. So that's my indication that they're not increments of 1 unit. So then I'm going to do 2 units. So 62, 64, 66, 68, 70. So that was the whole point of me telling you before to pay attention to how these are marked on the syringe. So if it's 64 units, then I'm just going to go 2, 4, and I'm going to mark my syringe at the 64 units total. There are other, so this question isn't asking this, but there are questions that ask you to indicate with 2 arrows. You can look at the previous questions associated with that. And we'll probably worry about that next semester because you won't be marking 2 points on the Blackboard test. This is another one you'll be relieved to get a question like this because you've already seen these, right? So the order is 0.8 grams by mouth, QID 4 times a day, and then how much to give per dose. And we have 400 milligram tablets available. So it's in grams. We're just going to convert that to milligrams over my available times your tablet, and you get 2 tablets. Now, if you are answering this on a paper test, make sure you're indicating your units. On Blackboard, you just write the number. All right. And we'll do the Haldol question real quick. So it says Haldol 1 milligram by mouth twice a day. How many tablets should the patient receive per day? So again, make sure you're reading it, okay? It tells us we have a 0.5 milligram available dose. So that's the same thing as saying 0.5. Again, if you like working with fractions, great, but most of the basic 10 key calculators, it's hard to kind of remember what to do with the fractions and how to treat them. But if you convert it to a decimal, you can plug that into the calculator quite easily. So 1 milligram, and that's per tablet. So they're going to get 2 tablets per dose. And if we're getting it twice a day, then they're going to get 4 tablets per day. And then again, on Blackboard, you would just type in 4.
How did you get the 2 doses?
BID. Yep. So when we're looking at the order, you do need to know BID, TID, QID, Q12H, Q4H, and then it's in your packet. And it's also on Blackboard in the resources section. It's just some common abbreviations. So just make sure you review those and know those. I don't know if you'll get any per day questions, but it's a fair question to ask. All right. Let's do Lanoxin. So the order is Lanoxin 500 micrograms, and we want to know how many tablets to give. It doesn't tell us BID or anything like that, but even if it did, if it just asks for how many tablets, it's asking per dose. We look at our label and we can see that it says 250 micrograms. So that this like this kind of thing that like it looks like a U, it's actually the Greek letter mu is the same thing as MCG, just in case you see it. Okay. Or it's the same thing as 0.25 milligrams. So this is not telling you to multiply anything. This is just telling you that both of these mean the same thing. So 250 micrograms equals 0.25 milligrams. So what's my order? 500 micrograms. What's my available? 250 micrograms. That's per tablet. And that is 2 tablets. Morphine, it's intramuscular. So it's going to be mLs. Stat means now. And it tells you to solve for ml. So we have an order of 12 milligrams, and our available is 15 per ml. So I'm just going to take my 12 milligrams divided by my 15, my available, times 1 ml. And then see what that comes out to be. So 12 divided by 15, we get 0.8 milliliters. And then if there was a Tubex, you would mark the Tubex. If there's a syringe, you would mark the syringe. But in this particular one, we don't. And if you're writing this into Blackboard, you do want to make sure you write 0.8. Okay, so don't forget your 0, your decimal, and your 8. If you just put 0.8, it will get marked wrong, and the answer is wrong because you're supposed to know to use those leading zeros when you have a decimal answer. All right. And then last, certainly not least, the Aldamet question. And it says you have Aldamet as labeled below. Your patient is ordered 300 milligrams by mouth 3 times a day. How many milliliters will you give per dose? So I don't need to worry about the TID in this particular question. I just need to worry about converting the 300 milligrams to milliliters while using the available, which is the 250 mg per 5 ml. So I'm just going to take my 300 milligrams over my 250 milligrams times my 5 ml. So 300 times 5 is 1500 divided by 250. And I get 6 milliliters.
Okay, I have a question.
Go ahead.
The question we solved and we have to multiply it twice a day. So yes, so I was thinking we still multiply the GID, which is 6 times 3 is 18 ml.
So you would only multiply by 3 if it asked you for the per day. So how many milliliters would you give per day? If it tells you per dose, or if it just says how many milliliters will you give, you're just going to calculate for the one dose. Cool. All right. Well, that's what I wanted to go over. Are there any other questions? Anything you're apprehensive about? Or you good to go? I think you're good to go, but that's also based off of zero feedback, but that's okay. Okay. So what I'll say is just continue to practice. It's more important that you understand how you set up the questions than it is um, that you get different questions. Just practice the setup, because the only thing that really changes is the name of the medication, the order, and the available. Um, Obviously that's a lot of things that change, but the reason that formula is sticky, order of available, is because it doesn't matter what the order is and doesn't matter what the available is. It just matters that you know how to organize it when you're solving for these things. Just don't forget your quantity, whether that's one tablet, 5 ml, 15 ml, 20 ml, whatever it happens to be. Make sure you're paying attention to the quantity. Um, Follow your rounding rules. If it's a number greater than one, and we're not doing a metric to metric conversion, number greater than one, round to the nearest tenth. If it's a number less than one, round to the nearest hundredth. Again, the exception to that is when you're doing a metric to metric conversion. If you have any questions between now and when you take your test next week, just you can email me, and happy to answer your question. What's helpful is if you send me like a screenshot of the question that you're having trouble with. And then and if I can't help you, I'll let you know via email. I'll let you know. Maybe we can jump on a Zoom call and or Zoom meeting and try and get it all together. So there's no other questions. Good luck on your test, and then I'll see you guys the next time I see you. You're welcome.